4 billion people are alive right now because of one invention, and almost nobody can name it. It isn't the internet, it isn't antibiotics, it's artificial fertilizer. Fertilizer grows roughly half of all the food on Earth, which means roughly half the nitrogen atoms in your body passed through a factory before they became you. So here's the uncomfortable math. If one experiment on one laboratory bench in 1909 had failed, your odds of ever being born drop to a coin flip. Heads, you're watching this video. Tails, nobody is. And it's not just you. Cities, wars, empires, the whole century was riding on that flip. Today, we flip that coin. This is what happens if fertilizer was never invented. First, the real history. In 1898, the chemist William Crookes stood up in front of the entire British scientific establishment and announced, politely, that everyone was going to starve. Not from war, from arithmetic. Wheat needs nitrogen. Every harvest removes it from the soil. And humanity was running out of ways to put it back. Now here's the cosmic joke. Nitrogen is 78% of the air. You are swimming in it right now. But atmospheric nitrogen comes welded shut. Two atoms locked together by one of the strongest bonds in chemistry, and plants cannot open the jar. For 4 billion years, the only things that could were lightning and a handful of very smug bacteria. Crookes ended his speech with a challenge. Somewhere out there, a chemist would have to figure out how to pull bread out of thin air. He had no idea how literally someone was about to take him. So what did the 19th century actually run on? Bird droppings. Seriously, guano, centuries of compacted seabird droppings on Pacific islands, was such a strategic resource that in 1856, America passed a law letting any citizen claim unclaimed Guano Islands for the United States. That law is how America acquired dozens of islands. Not for gold, for poop. And when the guano ran low, everyone pivoted to the Atacama Desert, the world's biggest deposit of natural saltpeter, so valuable that in 1879, Chile, Peru, and Bolivia fought an actual war over it. Chile won the desert. Bolivia lost its entire coastline, and it is still, officially, upset about that. One desert. Feeding the planet. Fleets of sailing ships hauled its nitrate around Cape Horn to the farms of Europe, and everyone quietly understood the math. The deposits were finite. The demand was not. The countdown had already started. Enter Fritz Haber. In 1909, on a laboratory bench in Germany, he does what lightning does. Under crushing pressure and heat, he cracks open the nitrogen bond and drips out liquid ammonia, a few tablespoons an hour. Carl Bosch then scales that tabletop trick into a full industrial plant by 1913. The newspapers call it bread from air. It will end up feeding, by most estimates, about half of humanity. And now, let's break it. Our point of divergence, the demonstration fails, the seals rupture, the yields disappoint, and chemistry moves on to other problems. And yes, before the comments say it, someone would crack it eventually. But without Haber's demo, there's no funding, no Bosch, and no answer to hydrogen rotting steel from the inside. So, in our alternate timeline, ammonia synthesis doesn't arrive in 1913. It arrives in the 1950s. 40 missing years. Let's watch what they do. Because here's what they never print on the fertilizer bag. The same nitrogen chemistry that grows food also makes high explosives. Every artillery shell of World War I is, chemically speaking, concentrated plant food, with opinions. When the war starts, Britain's navy immediately cuts Germany off from Chilean saltpeter. In December 1914, the Royal Navy destroys Germany's Pacific Squadron off the Falklands, and with it, any hope of another nitrate shipment ever docking in Hamburg. By the end of that year, Germany is months from running out of ammunition. In real history, it's the converted ammonia plants that keep German guns firing for 4 more years. Delete those plants, and the shell crisis of 1915 isn't a crisis. It's a countdown. By 1916, the guns are rationed to a whisper, and a war that killed millions over 4 years sputters instead toward a negotiated peace. Not because anyone became wise, because one side ran out of chemistry. Now the dominoes. A negotiated peace in 1916 means no American entry into the war, no total German collapse, no Treaty of Versailles, no humiliation clause, no crushing reparations, none of the resentment that a certain failed Austrian painter rode to power. The most asked question in all of alternate history: how do you stop the Second World War? And the answer might be, break one gasket in a German laboratory. And it keeps going. Russia's revolution came after 3 years of catastrophic war losses. End the fighting early, and the Tsar's rotten regime may stagger on. No Lenin moment, possibly no Soviet Union. Meanwhile, America, which in our timeline entered the war a debtor and left it the world's banker, stays home. Richer, quieter, and a decade less entangled in Europe's problems. So congratulations, you've prevented World War II and the Cold War. Probably, maybe. Now hold that thought, because this is exactly where the good news ends. Remember Crookes' warning? In our timeline, fertilizer factories turned it into a punchline. In this one, it comes true right on schedule. Through the 20s and 30s, harvests hit the ceiling, and there's only one move left on the board: plow more land. Forests fall across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. This world trades explosions for axes. Geopolitics warps around the one place that still has nitrogen. The Atacama becomes this century's Persian Gulf. Courted, threatened, fabulously rich, and great powers guard Guano Islands like aircraft carriers. Countries that live on imported grain, Britain and later Japan, start treating food routes the way our world treats oil routes, with battleships. Empires cling harder to farmland colonies because land is now the only food technology left, so decolonization comes later in this world. And uglier. And millions of Europeans who stayed home in our timeline board emigrant ships instead, chasing farmland across the Atlantic. The Great Migration Wave gets a second act. Then comes the cruelest miss of all. In real history, the 1960s Green Revolution, the miracle wheat and rice that saved South Asia from predicted mega famines, had a dirty secret. Those crops are miracles because they can absorb enormous doses of synthetic nitrogen. The seeds without the fertilizer are an engine without fuel. The dwarf wheat that doubled India's harvest in a decade in our world stays a greenhouse curiosity in this one. So the famines our timeline narrowly dodged arrive. Quietly, without a single battlefield, hunger becomes this century's biggest killer. And the deepest change is the people who simply never are. Demographers credit synthetic nitrogen with feeding roughly 3 to 4 billion people. This alternate Earth, by the end of the century, might hold 4.5 billion instead of 8. That's the coin flip. Heads, you're watching this video. Tails, half the audience was never born. Eventually, in the 1950s of this world, someone does crack it. The knowledge arrives like a rescue ship that is 40 years late. The hungry planet industrializes fertilizer at panic speed. A delayed green revolution finally lands in the 70s, and populations surge, but they surge into a different Earth. Poorer. More deforested. Still more colonial. Its politics shaped by 2 full generations of scarcity. And here's the final irony, because alternate history always keeps a receipt. Our timeline's cheap nitrogen gave us ocean dead zones, poisoned rivers, and a potent greenhouse gas. This world skips decades of that pollution, and pays for it in vanished forests instead. There is no version of this story where humanity eats for free. We tell history as a story of battles and speeches, because battles and speeches make good statues. But run this exercise honestly, and the real hinges of the 20th century are hiding in laboratory notebooks and pressure valves. One reaction, discovered on time, and the century gets Versailles, the Cold War, and 8 billion people. Discovered 40 years late, and it gets none of them. There's no statue of Karl Bosch in most world capitals. But there are plenty of statues of generals whose wars his reactors quietly fed. The most important inventions are the ones so successful they became invisible. You ate one today. So, what's the most underrated hinge in history? The invention nobody talks about that quietly built your world? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe. There are a lot more timelines where this one came from.